So these are challenges. These are practical challenges that come in, right? Even when we talk about cybersecurity, just because we can have the biggest and the most expensive firewall that anybody can buy, does that stop or protect you 100%? Right? And it's about public trust. It's not just about what's inside here. We are not protecting what's inside here. No, we deal with my information probably as a citizen of Sri Lanka. It's probably sitting in one of these systems over here. Now, am I at peace to say that Ministry of Finance, if you all have my identity, because I'm signing my identity, I'm using my identity number, my phone number, where I work, all of these things are what we call personal data. And it's in our PDPA Act and all of that is coming now. This information is confidential data to me. If that information is leaked or is compromised, me as an individual, I'm at risk. So am I comfortable coming in the morning and signing all of that information here? Do I know to absolute fact that you all have the people, the processes, the tools to protect that? I don't know. But this is where it's coming to. This is where places like the European Union, GDPR, right? These are some of the fundamental, this is why they're so strong in those, right? Today in GDPR, any European citizen, if I say remove all of my information from your telco system, they have to comply to that within 72 hours. They have to remove every bit of information that it is. That is also coming into play with the PDPA we're talking about. So it's about public trust, right? It's about public trust. Then it's about the government sensitive information. This is what we're protecting. We are not protecting our network, our PCs, or whatever it is. We are protecting the people, identities, and data. That is what everybody is after. That's the new currency in the digital world. It's data. And attacks are no longer, you won't get people trying to brute force the firewall, come straight through the front door. No. Attackers are lazy. They're software developers by nature. So they're lazy. They find the easiest way. And today you're targeting systems, that means it's all identity-based. It's all credential-based attacks. Most people are already logged into the system. Right? So when you're already logged into the system and you have the credentials, then what do? You don't need to. Your firewall is not going to catch that. Your spam gateway is not going to catch that. Your antivirus is not going to catch it. Right? Ideally, this pass, I should have said that I'm going to the ITMD route. Then this should have been authorized me to only go there. But does this stop me from going anywhere in MOF? It's the same principle in cybersecurity. What attackers do is they find the easiest way in. They don't look for the most difficult thing to come into. They look for the easiest. It can be a social engineering attack. Social engineering is, I know Misachini, right? I find a way somehow, to come and log in. Or I have access to the Wi-Fi also here because I'm working on this. So I know Misachini. I somehow figure out, okay, what her credentials are. Maybe we are working on the exchange or whatever it is, and then I need to log into the system. So I use Ms. Sachini's credentials. Now, that might not give me the privileges I need to go and access all the systems. But what attackers do is they start moving what's known as a lateral movement. They move from one device to the other, then see if there are credentials that are more privileged credentials. Then they move on from there until they get the credentials they need. Then what happens is, like here, I go from room to room to room to room. If there is a safe in one of these rooms, nobody's going to stop me from getting there. Right? All I need is the code for the safe. And that is the privilege, that is the identity, that's the credentials we're talking. Right? So attackers follow this process. They don't go full brute force and try to attack it. No, they're in for the long run. They say that there is two kinds of organizations in the world: those who have been hacked and those who don't know that they have been hacked. Majority of the time, we don't know that we're hacked. That's the scary part of cybersecurity. Right? So traditionally, this is what we've been doing, right? I mean, have a perimeter network, protect that with firewalls, load balanced, all of that is happening. We give, if somebody wants external access, what do? We do give VPN access. Right? I need to work from somewhere on a system that is only accessible internal. We get a VPN client, we connect to the network. Now, the problem with that is when you give access, you're not restricting access. You're giving access to the entire system. Right? Internal network equals safe, wrong. Right? It's very difficult to see. If I was to ask, do you all know to an absolute certainty all of the assets that are sitting inside here or in your respective organizations? What is the software inventory? What is the hardware inventory? All of those things? Chances are no. And this is not a local problem here in MOF or these organizations. It's everywhere in Sri Lanka. Even banks today are struggling. Why? They don't have. But what's the challenge there? Why is that important? Visibility is the most important thing. We need information in order to protect. Right? And the digital landscape is changing. There is no longer all of the things sitting inside our perimeter. We're using cloud services. It can be hybrid, it can be public, it can be private cloud, whatever cloud services. So that means our information is not only sitting here, it's sitting in other places as well. Right? So will the firewall in the perimeter stop that? No. Remote access. Everybody uses mobiles to connect today. Right? They probably have a tab, probably a mobile. Each user roughly has 3 devices they work on with. Right? So how do you then effectively secure that on all devices? Because it's not enough, right? If we have email access on web, so I download that attraction set. It's on my phone. Is that confidential information? Yes, obviously. Then it comes, okay, but then you need to protect the device as well. But then this is my personal device. I don't want you all accessing my personal device. Why does MOF need access to my personal device? So that's the challenge. So people, process, and tools. Right? And then there are partners like us who work with you all. We have VPN access to your network. You all know exactly at what time our engineers are logging into your system. We probably have credentials as well. So if we want, we can probably stop all of your services. I mean, you don't know, right? Now what we've seen is ISO 27001 compliance is coming in a long way. And part of that compliance is you all need to make sure the vendors you all are working with also are adhering to certain practices in cybersecurity. But we'll get to that later. So why the whole concept of zero trust is about defining to say, hey, look, we are not safe. That's the first thing we need to understand is we need to agree. Right? The worst posture to have in cybersecurity is to say that, we are safe. Because what happens then is then we get complacent, we stop looking, and we stop acting. So it's a continuous process where we have to first really understand is to trust nothing. We shouldn't be trusting Mr. Udesh with what he's doing. It's not about not trusting Mr. Udesh. But how do we know that it is Mr. Udesh who is logging in at that point? So this becomes the challenge in the traditional way we looked at it, right? Because there was no way that we could effectively find that it is Mr. Udesh who is logging in from his credential, his device, from his seat. Right? Most of the attacks come from outside of the country. Right? Can we say, okay, when Mr. Desh logs in, he logged in just now from here, but there is another login all of a sudden, which is happening from Singapore at the same time. Chances are right now, it would allow that access. And this is true to 99% of government, not just government, even private sector organizations in Sri Lanka. Right? So you have to verify. It's not enough to say, okay, it is Mr. Udesh. We need to verify at that point. Okay, is it really him? Is it really Mr. Ajay? Is it Ms. Udesh that's logging in at that point? Right? And then we need to also understand what does Mr. Udesh, what level of access does he need to do his job effectively? Right? It is not enough, it is not considered good practice to give blanket access in. You give access to only what is needed. Right? That's where we've talked about things like privilege access management, PAM systems coming from identity, that is to restrict access to critical systems who is logging in. Right? So the whole concept of that is you give just enough access at the time for the job that needs to be done. But that's not enough to have it at the privilege level. We have to have it across all our systems. Okay? And the most important is, like I said, assume breach. You have to always be vigilant to say, okay, we are hacked right now. Because otherwise what happens is we take a back seat and we forget about this. And one fine day, we figure out that our systems are not working, or somebody else has accessed something that they're not supposed to access. So all of these things happen. So it's a bit complicated, but when we talk about zero trust, in essence, there are 5 main pillars that we look at. We look at it from the identity, the person. We look at it from the device. We look at it from the application. We look at it from the network. And then obviously we look at it from data. Right? Each of these things are unique. And this forms what's known as a behavioral picture at the point in time of who is logging into the system. Right? It's not enough though to have the tools to protect. That's only one part of it. The most important thing is to continuously be able to detect, be able to react, and then respond. Right? Because we can have, probably you all have an antivirus and XDR system, you all have the firewall, you all have the spam gateways, everything. But are you all getting alerts right now to say, okay, this is unusual activity? Probably not. Right? So you have to have monitoring, observability is very important as well. Right? And then the processes. I'm not talking in general just from MOF here, but this is what's happening everywhere in Sri Lanka right now. Right? So let's look at this is every talk that I do on cybersecurity, this is the one thing that I always talk about. The most important thing, identity. Right? Anywhere we go as a citizen in the country, we use our national identity card. Right? That is what everybody understands as an authenticated way of saying who it is that I am, right? And how they identify. It is the same thing when you are logging to the computer in the morning. Most probably, hopefully, you'll use some sort of identity system to log into. You put your username, you put your password. That's the first level to say, okay, Jonathan has now logged into the system, logged into the computer, right? From there onwards, what if, my previous example, there is another login that's happening from my credentials somewhere else? How do you stop that? Right? So there is conditional rules that you can put, conditional access. To say if there is another login which is outside the normal practice, behavioral pattern. ඒ pattern එකට එළියෙන් මොන හරි එකක් එනවා නම් we challenge with another form of authentication. We've heard of multi-factor authentication, OTP. Banks, generally if you want to do banking transaction, we use OTP, SMS. It is not the most secure. There are better ways to do that right now, but at least there is MFA that comes in. What that does is, it's something I know and it's something I have as well. It can be a mobile application MFA token, it can be an SMS, it can be a hard token, something like that that comes in, which also verifies to a second degree who I am. Now, if we have that in place, that scenario where Mr. Sudesh logs in from somewhere else and is also logged in from here, doesn't happen. It can't happen. Right? But also, auditing and governance. Right? All of these standards we've seen a lot of cybersecurity policy standards these days. They'll say NIST, they'll say ISO, they'll say CE, multiple industry standards, right? All of them talk about the same thing though. All of them talk about you have the people, the process, and the tools. Auditing and governance is part of the process that we need to follow. If we do not audit, we'll never find. Why do we do financial audits? It's a moot point, right? Same way, our systems also need to be audited, right? Is that then the continuous approach of recycling? So there is a life cycle in identity, right? So I'm born, I get my first official identity, which is my birth certificate, right? From there onwards, school, all of that happens. Then I get my actual national identity. Then if I get married, then, get a marriage certificate, and finally there's a death certificate also that happens. This is the same life cycle that needs to be managed in your digital estate as well. When you come in or onboarded through the HR process, you should automatically, or rather that person needs to be created in your identity system. That's your first identity card, that's your issue, right? And that will tell you who you are. Anybody here can, very easily see who I am, what is my position, all of these things, and that is also what gives you access to your systems, right? This is the ideal way, but for that to happen, systems also need to consume that same identity, right? Whatever systems that you are using today needs to be able to consume that identity. So there is an integration that's needed there. That's where we talk about things like there is a concept called single sign-on. Single sign-on means we have one token which is then shared across all of your applications. That reduces a lot of things. That reduces the footprint that we have in terms of different identities on different systems. Traditionally, what we used to do is we used to have a database, an application. The application database itself has the authentication. That practice now, and it doesn't scale in web as well. It doesn't work very well in the web world or web applications. Why? Because you cannot scale that accordingly. So we need to consolidate all of our identities. You have one identity system that increases the level of security that you can bring in. It also reduces the attack surface a lot. Because the problem with passwords is, I can ask probably most of you, and you would say that you use the same password for most of the applications. Right? I mean, we are human. We are not going to remember 10 different passwords. Sometimes even our banking, we use the same password that we use to log into the laptop. Now, there are some who do it a little better. No, I use different passwords, but they write it down. Right? They will write it down. Either you'd have a sticky note or something like that, write the password down. And otherwise, what we do is most of the time, passwords we create also out of something we're familiar with to remember it, right? It can be a child's name, it can be a birthday. Most of the time it's birthdays. These are the things. The problem with that is attackers know this, right? How they do credential harvesting is they have what's known as a dictionary. And the dictionary has commonly used passwords. Most people in IT here, if you're working, they would know that very, very famous uh, admin password or a credential, which is password, capital P at SSW0RD. Right? People know these things. That's how they get access. So how do you stop it though? Right? You have to train people. Right? There has to be cybersecurity awareness that comes into play. But at the same time, you can't rely on that. So then you have to have systems like this, which is identity, where you reduce the involvement of the user unknowingly creating a problem. Right? So you reduce the exposure by never trusting. That's number one. Right? So identity, I think, is the single most important thing that we have to consider in our journeys. Why? Now we're talking about digital identity in Sri Lanka. What does that mean? Ideally, technically, a few more things that needs to happen in the architecture for this to happen, but if I have one single digital identity, I should be able to use that as a citizen across all of the different government services that are. That's the goal, right? When you have my digital identity, when I go and apply for a bank loan, whatever it is, they use the same identity and they can use that to check in the different organizations that needs to be checked. That's the goal. But that also poses the problem. Let's scale it down. Government digital ID. Let's say, if you all have a single ID that you're using. Now, you might need to use those in places like IRD, customs. You all integrate with these organizations, right? It's not even to integrate. You all should be already integrated. There's data that needs to be accessed across. How do you do that if you have different identity systems which comes into play? You can't, right? This alone, in most of the standards that we look at, consists of 90% of cybersecurity risk is stopped here. If you do it right, you can probably even get rid of your firewall. That's how powerful this is. That's what, it's often overlooked as well. Any questions on this? Or can I keep going? So now you all know who I am in the system. You all have already established that I am who I say I am. I have a token which allows me now access to what I've been given access to, right? But then what am I doing with that access? What am I accessing? The most important things is systems and data. So data, right? Who has access to my data? Now, you all probably are looking at different organizations, looking at going to cloud, M365, cloud-based email. A lot of advantages there, but also a lot of problems. From a cybersecurity, if I wear a cybersecurity hat and look at it, I would say, no, please don't. Right? From a productivity standpoint, where the organization needs to go, you absolutely have to go there. But you get a compliance or a governance and a compliance officer who comes and looks at it and says, oh, please don't. Don't go there. Why? We'll have things like OneDrive and Google and all of these things, regardless of what platform you use, which allows you to store data on the cloud. Right? Now, imagine it's me and I leave tomorrow. What happens? So, the life cycle of data is first of all, we need to understand what is the data we have. We're talking about PDP and all of these things, right? A lot of the times we have seen this DLP, tooling called DLP coming up all the time, data loss prevention. But what are you protecting? Most organizations go and say, okay, we need to buy a tool. We need to protect our data, so let's buy a tool. Let's buy DLP. No. First, you have to understand what is your data. Classification of data is the most important thing. And often, every organization who goes into a DLP fails because they haven't done that. Right? Because you haven't done classification of your data, you don't know what you're protecting. So then you just do some general labels and all of these things. Either what happens is people can't use the tool, they get fed up and they don't do their jobs, or you miss exactly what you're supposed to do with the tool. We are working with a bank right now who's struggling for the past 3 years to implement DLP. It's not easy. So the first thing is classifying data, understanding exactly what is the data I'm creating for myself, what is the personal data, the private data, citizen data that's coming, and then organizational data. So data classification is the most important thing, because once you've classified, then you can start to understand where that data is. Because data is not in one system, right? Like I said, how do you classify the data no matter what system? When I come and write on the book in the front and put all of my data there, what tool can stop you from doing that? Right? How can you stop a person taking a photograph of that data? Can't. Right? So that's where policies come into play as well. There should be, it's not enough to have the tool, you have to train the people, but you also have to have the policies in place that if something like this happens, what is the repercussion? How do you respond? And how do you take action? Right? Ransomware attacks. What does it do? Data. So, what happens if there is a underlining? So, in the ISC squared framework, CISSP, they talk about 10 domains in cybersecurity. Generally, when we talk about security, we only talk about protecting, access, stopping. But in reality, when we talk about backup and disaster recovery, is actually a cybersecurity concept. Right? Today, if there is a ransomware attack on your data, can you recover? Chances are no. But not you specifically, but in general, chances are no. This has happened in government, unfortunately. This is not new to us. We know that this happened in government. What happened? We lost months of data. Right? So you can have all the protection in place, but part of the protection also is about availability. Right? Disaster recovery, service availability is also cybersecurity. So that something happens, we've come from a time where we're involved, there are so many things that can happen. Something happens to the data center. We just went through a natural disaster as well. Something happens to the data center. How do you recover? Right. So it's not enough to do the discovery and all of those things. You'll also have to talk about what happens in the worst case scenario. Right. Now, like I said, you came in, with my identity. Now I'm, coming and talking to most people here. What if I pick a file from the table and go? These are the practical problems of cybersecurity, right? And if we look at it in isolation, if we look at it from isolation, it looks very scary. But if we relate it to the everyday use that we're doing, it becomes much easier to consume. This is where companies like the top tech companies, their biggest investments today is not just the technology, it's in the security part. Microsoft, for a fact, they spend about $10 billion every year just on security. That is protecting the infrastructure that then we can use. right? Most companies in Sri Lanka, organizations, unfortunately, don't look at cybersecurity proactively as a holistic approach. Money starts coming in once there's an attack. It's too late, right? But can you do all of this at once? No. It's about risk mitigation, right? Reducing the risk. So how much investment that comes in is correlated to the level of risk in that organization. Banks generally have higher investments in cybersecurity. Why? Because it's important. Right? A bank going down for a day or two means they are losing billions. Right? If the government treasury system goes down for 2 days. So higher risk there, high investments there. Right? But it's always about risk mitigation. You look at the level of risk, you try to remove much of that attack surface as possible. You take the human part of it out as much as possible, right? Because if we try to rely on each and every one of us, even we make mistakes, right? We can talk about all of this, even we make mistakes. The same example, I use the same password across all the systems. Okay. But now there are tools to help us in that also. There is heard of passwordless authentication, passkeys. Every device you buy today is passkey enabled. Your mobile phone, whether it's Android or iOS, it actually has what's known as a passkey. Now, what the passkey does is you save the passkey on your phone, and most of the web applications today actually can consume that passkey. Because it's going away from the traditional username and password. It's actually using your device's footprint along with your identity to create a unique identity. So that means unless I have that passkey, nobody can access. So that reduces the entire footprint by 9. So there are new things that are always coming out like this, which really does help us in this domain, right? But we also always have to look at it from the concept, right? Identity as a concept, not as a product or a tool. If you look at products and tools, it doesn't make sense. Then the network. This is a bit of a subject because the network right now, I would say it doesn't exist. Internet is the network right now. That's the medium we use basically to log into everything. And unless we have that as a medium to log into everything, so that we can't do our job as well. I mean, where I work, I don't think it matters. We don't have a local network that works. We just have internet access, right? Because it's always all our systems are either cloud-based or whatever it is. So it really doesn't matter to us to have a network, right? But critical infrastructure like government has to have a network, right? But the problem is that network is not contained anymore. You can't contain the network. Right? When you start looking at just protecting the network, it becomes very difficult. But there are tools that can help you do that. But I would say you keep this as a last resort of the network because you have this anyway. There's nothing much we can do here unless we protect the network. But the thing with network is it's about analyzing traffic. Right? It's about understanding where those packets are going, who is accessing what on what routes. Right? To do that is where you start looking at network monitoring. So the most important thing, the network side is not the tools, but the monitoring part of it, observability. Observability is the most important thing in the network. If you do the observability part right, you can probably stop or detect any anomalies as soon as they happen. That's the most important thing in the network, right? And if you have the tools at that point, if there is something like that happening, you can cut off the access at once. That's where the network is important. Applications are, if I was to ask how many applications we access on a daily basis, probably say email, probably say, but if you all have an ERP or some sort of system. But Facebook is an application. Gmail is an application. I've still seen most of the government, there's a lot of emails that happen through Yahoo, Google, and either Hotmail or whatever it is. Each of those is an application. The problem with enabling the YouTube is an application. The problem with enabling those internally is attackers also know this. So they would send you an email or something saying, hey, click this link on WhatsApp. Click this link, it will look like a YouTube link, it would look like your traditional link, and say, log into this to get access. That's phishing 101. Right? So also, sometimes we've seen people using third-party file sharing applications these days. That's crazy. Those are absolute no's. But how do you stop it? How do you know for an absolute certainty what are the applications that are being used today? There's this concept called shadow IT. Shadow IT means basically you'll have a system to do something, but there are 10 other systems that people use because of convenience. WhatsApp is a good example. How many private chats do you all have on WhatsApp? Organizational chats. Sometimes, we need to get approval, something to communicate fast. Project teams, a lot of the time use WhatsApp. But what happens to the WhatsApp data when the person leaves? Do you all own that data on WhatsApp? No. Right, so the applications we use are very important. But how do you stop it? You can't stop it. If you know the identity, you can create profiles through your firewalls. Probably you can use certain levels of access restrictions. But the main thing is knowing what is being used. Inventory. Right? So attackers target applications now. They don't target the physical infrastructure. They target applications. Through those applications is when they start doing that lateral movement and privilege escalation. Because those are easy targets. Right? My Facebook or my whatever is an easy target. If I am using Facebook from my internal computer, that's a risk. And that's how people get into your system. Right? So this is my favorite devices. So identity and devices, I think my recommendation for the two most critical things that you all should be looking at. If you all don't take anything apart from this entire presentation, take these two. So zero trust is built mainly around. So I have my device, right? Now, I know what's on the device. I know what's on the device. My organization also knows that I have this device, right? But what happens if I lose it tomorrow? My laptop is stolen. Or get into a tussle with my boss, and I decide I'm going to teach him a lesson. I delete everything. And these things happen, right? Unfortunately, one thing I didn't say yet is 90% of attacks happen internally. 90% of attacks that happen internally. Some are known, but most are unknown again, but they come internally. Right? So, device. So, we establish my identity. I have my identity that I take around now in the digital world. The next is, what am I accessing from? Right? That creates the pattern of the person. I have a mobile, which I use. I have my laptop. I have a tab. These are all devices that I use. So the organization needs to know for an absolute fact, what are the devices I'm using to access the organization's data. If you don't know this is the biggest problem that you have, because you don't know. Right? If you don't know what device you're accessing from, how are you going to protect it? Like I said, right, if I walk to the front door, I have to sign. If I come to the vehicle, I don't sign. Right? Again, then it creates, what are the applications? And I mean, how many doors do I have? If I come for the back door, because we work a lot with you, we know the different ways, unfortunately. Because we work here, we know most of the doors in MOF. Like I said, the front door, yes, I get my pass. Then you come to the back door. If the security is there, he'll probably use his access card to let me inside. But he'll probably let me inside. The worst part is now they've seen me so many times here. The security say, "Sir, give it." So I need to sign on the book, right? This is the problem with profiles. This is important to understand who and from what as well. These are the basics that create, or the basis rather, that creates the profile of the user. Hello. So devices are very important, and devices also comes into assets. Right? So asset in knowing how many devices is there. How many devices do you all have in MOF right now? I think it's 1,000. No. Right. The software that runs on devices is very important, right? Patches, security updates, all of these things are part of the cybersecurity landscape. Talk about patch management and things like that, it's not a separate subject. Why do you patch things? Because there is a risk. Right? So how do you know what the software is that needs to be patched? You don't know how many devices that you have. If you don't know what is the operating system on each of those devices. Right? So is how many laptop roaming devices that have been taken outside of the organization. Right? big problem that there is in private sector is you have these directors who work on many boards. It's in government as well. Most of the time they have the same device that they use in all the organizations. So we've seen a lot of the time also, I don't know if this is in government also, but if a director wants access to something, they give all the access. Why? You know, how do you do this? Those are the easiest things, you give full access. Right? So I have a device now which I have full access to multiple organizations. And chances are most of those organizations don't know I have that. So it's like a black hole. Right? This is the observability. This is the visibility part of security, which can only be obtained by understanding these principles. So that's why, again, going back to never trust, always verify. It doesn't matter if the person walks through the door every day. If the policy is that it needs to be verified, it needs to be verified. This is again the concept of assumed breach. Why? The security guard assumes that I have good intentions today. Who knows what side of the bed I woke up on? Understand. Creating that profile is very important. And that's where you can have all the tools in the world. You can do all of the things I'm talking to you about also. But if you don't follow the policy and the process, nowhere. But it's not about blocking everything also. At the end of the day, if you block everything, then we can't do our jobs also. You can't get productivity. It's about smart access. It's not about no access. Right? You find a way to give the users exactly what they want without restricting. You can't restrict as well. You say, the other thing is now layers of security, right? They call it the layers of the onion. Just imagine if in the morning I need to put my username and password. Now I need to log in. On top of that, I need to use an OTP also. And then every time I log into an application, I have to do the same process as well. Now, will I work like that? No, probably not. Right? So, this is the problem with it. You can invest and buy tools and put all of these controls in place. But at the end of the day, if the person can't do their job, what's the point in everything? Right? So it's about, again, risk mitigation. The higher the risk, yes, the more security. But also it has to be smart security. Just because we buy everything there is and put all of these things in place, doesn't mean that we're secure. This is the problem that most organizations find today. This is the practical side of it, right? So why once we know who, we know what device, we know what we're accessing, it's about risk-based decisions. That's the most important. Right. So that's a typical scenario. I think we spoke about this, but let's say a user gets an email. Phishing emails are probably the number one attack vector for anybody because it's the easiest way to hack someone. Right? Now, yes, we have spam filters, all of these things. Can you do 100%? No. There's always that 1 or 2 that creeps through. Right? You will never get a security product that says we are 100% secure. Never get it. It doesn't exist. Why? As much as we are doing to protect, the attackers are always finding ways, new ways to attack. Today, they're using AI tools, the same tools that we are using to help being productive, to attack. There was a large attack last year in the Bellagio in US. Right? The attackers brought down the system for 2 days. The casino was down for 2 days. The apparent loss of that was $5 billion. Right? So, email comes in. You can do most of these tools now, spam filters, have a way that you can simulate problems. It's to understand how people react. We did this in our company as well. Needless to say, all 3 directors clicked on the email. Right? We are a technology company, we talk about cybersecurity, all 3 directors clicked on the email. How do you stop that? So, awareness is important. Is everybody capable of looking at a particular URL and saying this is legitimate? It's very difficult. Because today they're using different symbols and different dialects. Even the term Microsoft now can look like Microsoft or not. The way they're so smart the way they do those, right? But there are certain characteristics. If somebody is asking you for information and it's the first time an email has come, generally it's spam. Right? So there is some practicality that needs to come out from people as well. But you can do that through training as well. Only thing you can do that is training. Most organizations, high secure organizations, require that people are trained on a quarterly basis. And there is a test session and there is a test as well that goes through. Quarterly is a bit much, but at least biannual. I need to do trainings for people. Right? So now anyway, the email comes through, I click on it, I give my username and password also. But then what can the attacker do with my username and password? I'm nobody in the organization. I don't have access to anything secure. Right? But the attacker has won already. He's inside. Right? He's inside. Now my computer, I take it all over the place, plug it into the network as well. Now is when the fun starts. Right? That is when this network also comes into play. So all the parts that we're talking about, identity, compromise, device, compromise. Now I plug it in the network as well. So now the attacker has 3 ways, or rather, quite a strong footprint to start actually doing his attack. The attack is not the phishing. We oftentimes think that the attack is the email. The attack is not the email. That's only opening the door. That's just putting the foot inside the door to see you again. Now is when the fun starts, because then is when the attacker actually starts the attack, because they do what I said before, the privilege escalation, the lateral movement, and then the data. Right? There are some attacks that are coming from email itself. That's not spam, rather. I mean, you get attachments sometimes. Attachments generally have executables. If the executable runs, then that's an attack itself. But then either it's a backdoor or a ransomware or something like that, which anyway is a program that runs at the backend. This kind of one where credentials are it's not random, it's targeted. So that means the person knows exactly what he wants to do. Right? So even though we are thinking no, we are secure and all of these things, the attacker sees something that he wants to get. So the email comes through, click on it, go on, I have device access, network access. I have started my journey in moving across the this thing as well. Now, question, is this an internal or an external attack? You're using the person's credentials. So is it internal or external? It was originated externally, but now it's an internal attack. Are you going to get any signals coming from outside? No. So now it's an internal. This is where I said internal attacks are the most, because after they get credentials are inside, why would you go outside again? Then they start spreading internally. Right? There are organizations, unfortunately, 1 year they didn't know that there were external people inside the network. For a whole year, they've been sifting information, passing information, all of these things. Right? So that's why those who know they've been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked too. There is no one in the middle to say we have not been hacked. That's a fool's hope. Right? But how do you protect this? Now let's think about the practical, we apply, that's my next slide actually, sorry. Now traditionally, if we look at it, like I said, login was successful, full access was given. But if we apply some of those zero trust principles, we can catch it before it happens. Right? Because we are doing verification again. It's not enough to say that the credentials were given, but we are verifying against the different factors: device, location, and identity. And this is where this all comes to play. Because your spam, definitely you're going to get spam. Right? Identity, if it's synchronized, yes, otherwise there's a challenge. So if you know that, okay, it is Achini who is logging in, but she's not logging in from her usual device, nor is she logging in from the place she normally logs in. So you have a behavioral profile. With that, the system is smart enough then to say, hey, look, no, I see something fishy happening in the phishing email. Please give me a second form of knowing it is exactly you. So then they use the second form of authentication. No attack. Okay. This is the unfortunate truth that exists. Insider misuse. Most of the time it's not misuse. Actually, this is a very strong way of putting this, but most of the time it's negligence. People don't know. Right? They click on that email because they just don't know. They would share data because they don't know. So then how do you protect against that? Again, limit what they have access to. You have to look at it from a point where you're only given access to the job you need to do. Now, it connected me to the auditorium Wi-Fi here. Better way to do that is you'll have a guest Wi-Fi. And then the guest Wi-Fi is isolated from the other Wi-Fi, blah, blah, blah. So there are different ways that you can do this. But this is not just a Wi-Fi. At least it was a separate Wi-Fi called auditorium. Most of the time, it just goes to the main network. Right? That can't happen. Right? Now, if we had looked at some of those things, they know I'm a vendor here. Right? I would have been given as a vendor, we would have credentials to access MOF, to do our job. Today when I logged in then, you should have a record, the auditing and governance part of it. You should have a record to say, hey look, Jonathan came in the morning, he logged in from this Wi-Fi, and this is what he did. That is ultimately where we need to get to. Right? If I needed to access a particular system, maybe doing some work with different organizations, I would have created a request which said, hey, look, you need to access this server at this time to do this. At that point, you release another set of credentials for me, which will allow me, which is time bound, location bound, which will allow me to do exactly that for that specified period. After that, it's gone, right? When we created the request to do this Friday forum today, we moved from 9:30 to 11:30. Ideally, should I have this thing which says, okay, 9:30 to 11:30 for this session, here's the token. Now, is this required at MOF to invest so much to do this? That's a different question. Right? The thing is this, you can do all of this, but is it needed? I mean, what can I take? Right? Now, there are different departments, though. There are more sensitive departments here. Now, in those departments, yes, it would make sense, right? But understanding the risk exposure. The risk exposure is the first part. Knowing is the first part, right? Assuming breach is the first part. Then you start building from there on. We spoke of this also. Resource is me. So is systems, is it just MOF here or is it other organizations also? Customs, okay. So would you consider yourselves critical infrastructure? Of course, right? The Ministry of Finance, Sri Lanka, Customs. If your systems go down, we're what? Right? The second part about this, let's assume there is an attack. Let's assume not just an attack, something happens from a security standpoint, system goes down. What is your RPO and RTO? We often look at recovery point objective and recovery time. But basically what it's saying is, how long is it acceptable for the system to be down? We've seen things like we measure it in 99.9, 99, all of these things. It basically says how long is acceptable for the service to be down. And this is the other part I try and talk about separately is we always refer to the uptime either from an infrastructure level. But in reality, we should be looking at it from a service level. Because not all services have the same RPO and RTO. Right? So service availability is what we really need to worry about. Okay. So if one system goes down, how quickly can we fail over to the next system? It's a cybersecurity concept. It's not, we talk about BCDR as a separate thing. It's not. It is a cybersecurity, right? Because it's how secure the service is that we're giving. And security comes in different ways. It's not just about identity security. It's about service availability. So we talk about service availability, critical infrastructure, right? We talk about always on systems. Now, again, can do this. Can have an extremely high available, setup where you have high availability at the primary site. You have a DR, and you have a load balance in the middle which automatically fails over the DR. All of these things can be done. So why don't we do it? Because it costs a lot. So we need to understand how much is it worth again. It is about service availability. It's what I understand is the services we run. Say how much, right? How much of a time we can afford for the service to be done. Some systems, I would say, even 24 hours is okay. Right? So reduce the investment there and put it where it's needed. Now what we do is we do blanket approach. Like in the security thing, we need security, put antivirus very well. for the firewall, the best firewall there is. It's not practical. This is the problem, and problem is when you talk about doing these things practically, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and IT is anyway stretched thin. Can we still continue the same way we have been if we are looking at more digitization? We cannot. That's a recipe for disaster, right? Like my famous example for today, how I walked in through these doors, that needs to change, right? And I use this as an example. Generally, wherever we go, it's the same story. There is a cybersecurity policy in government, actually, by cert as well. But then most of the time, each organization does their own, right? And this becomes a never-ending. It's not a one-time operation. That's why it's easy to, or rather more practical, to adopt an industry standard. Right? ISO 27001 is a very good framework. I've seen the 101, 111 controls in it. But if you look closely, it'll talk about the concepts of zero trust. It talks about assets, it talks about identity, devices, data, and then the processes that come with it. Right? So these are not isolated environments. This is a unified approach. How do we build on top of that? National cybersecurity policies. There are, but there aren't also. Now, PDPA is an interesting one coming up. But chances are, Central Bank of Sri Lanka says all banks need to comply with DLP. And so what does everybody do? They have to comply. They buy the tool. It's what most organizations do. Because they have to comply, they need it. Now, other countries actually not just buy the tool, they actually enforce penalties. Because it is important. Right? There is no difference. We are related very closely to the critical infrastructure we are running here as well. Devices are the biggest challenge. Like I said, if we are bringing our personal devices in, the organization needs to understand what are the devices that are being used. How do you do it? I know I will say, no, this is my personal device. You all can't have access to my device. So how do you do that? Well, today you can actually. You don't need total device control. There is a profile that you can create for work profile, which gives you a very easy way to segregate personal from work. Right? These policies, these governance, these talk about all of those things. So if we haven't done it already, do it. Because this will get even more relevant when we start integrating organizations. Integration becomes a lot easier if there are standards involved, right? Integration becomes much easier if customs talks the same language as your. If IRD speaks the same. Today, if we try to integrate applications, we cannot. We cannot without an internal medium exchange. Why? Data formats all different. Think about it. If you are saving the date today as day, month, year, and they do month, day, year, how are you going to integrate? That's why there are standards. These are the standards. So in your standard, if we are looking at identity, having a consolidated view, right? If you all move in and say, hey, look, from today onwards, we'll be only using tokens in all our systems. And if customers can consume that token already, that should be the goal, right? I think there's a national cybersecurity policy needs to come in where we standardize and say, hey, look, when we are using tokens for authentication and all of that, these are the parameters that we have. That would make intergovernment communications a lot easier. And if you're following the same security standards, right, it becomes a lot easier to secure the entire thing as well. We spoke about this. Now, can we decide and put all of this tomorrow? No, it's a journey, right? The first thing is to drop the plan though. Have the strategy in place. First thing you need to do is put it into a plan, but have a timeline, right? Pick 1 or 2 areas that you will focus on, right? Chances are it's not all new as well. There is somewhere where we've done work on these areas already. Probably most organizations have an identity system already. We'll have it, we know it. Let's fine tune it a bit, right? Put it as part of the, look at it as part of the strategy instead of looking at it isolated. Then these things fall into place and then it becomes a lot easier to consume. And it's continuous improvement. Like I said earlier, you cannot, just because you do all of this also and have the zero trust, everything in the framework, doesn't mean that you can stop them. Because tomorrow, now we didn't talk about AI yet and the impact of AI in cybersecurity. Just touch on that a little bit later. But when that comes in, it's a completely different ballgame, right? So how does this scale and adapt is also important. So continuous improvement, right? Continuous learning is also part of that journey, and it is a journey. You can do all of this, but year on year, it'll change. So, has everybody here heard of quantum computing? The next phase of computing? Okay, so there's this quantum computing. When we talk about security, encryption is a big subject. We use sometimes 2048-bit encryption, right? 1024. Generally, our communications in TLS and all is 256-bit. 2048 is considered one of the highest encryptions. And apparently, it will take any of the supercomputers we have today, existing supercomputers, close to around 1,000 years to break one of those codes. It will take 1,000 years for the most powerful supercomputer today to break one of those codes or encryptions, which is 2048-bit. With quantum, apparently it takes only half an hour. The computation power that's going to bring, it's completely going to change everything we know about on cybersecurity today. Right? If we see quantum coming in, and it doesn't look like it's very far. We already have quantum applications being written today. Right? So it's completely going to change everything we know about security, encryption, all of those things. Why? Because it won't be relevant at the time, right?